Salutations, episode 7, and today we've got a follow-up to the Stop Killing Games initiative. So this could be the second Let's Talk episode, and I want to make this a series, I really do. However, I don't know if you guys want it to be a series, so if you guys are interested, let me know. Either comments or send me messages on Discord. I don't really care about how well the video performs as long as I get to talk to people. So let's have some fun. And for this, we have quite a few things we're going to be covering. First, the initiative hit 1.3 million signatures. Now, there have been some things that have been thrown around saying that potentially some of these have been falsified, and it's probably true. I mean, like, heck, when America gets notified of something that's going on and then they want to do something about it, they're going to try and do something about it, even if they don't exactly have jurisdiction. Happens quite often. But with this, we have quite a large number here, and hopefully that's enough to get over that threshold to have enough authentic signatures. But having more than what the overdrive even states would probably be a good idea. Especially since looking at the history of the EU initiative, there have been quite a few things that haven't been talked on yet that are in the huge backlog of initiatives. But this does have potential. This does have a lot more potential than some of the other ones because they do have some high up member agreements. So we'll talk about a lot of that later on with this video. But opening here, this is awesome. We've hit 94% overdrive, and I can't wait to see that number be 100%. But we have the first thing that I want to cover here is this Video Games Europe response. Here, let me try. And why is everything moving like this? Come on, here we go. Me relearning how to move things in OBS because I don't ever have to do that. But Video Games Europe position paper. This is a lobbying group from the EU that is here for lobbying in the video game industry for the video game industry. Now, they have quite a bit of things that go along with backing them here. It's not just this is some lobbying group. This is the lobbying group that has huge players. For example, looking at this membership list, we have quite a few big names. Activision Blizzard, Epic Games, EA, we have Nintendo, Microsoft, Riot Games, we have Take-Two Interactive, we have ZeniMax Studios, Warner Brothers. There's a whole bunch of names here. And there's one particular point that I want to really talk about with this, but before we get into that, I have a 12-minute clip. I think it's 12 minutes. Let me double check it before I go down into that. Let's open this up over here. It's 13 minutes. So 12 minutes 45 seconds of me going through and reading this paper for you guys. We're gonna go into that, and then I will talk about it after that clip ends. I pre-recorded that so I don't end up being out of wind when I go to talk about my opinions after reading this long as heck document. I'm already starting to get winded. I'm still freaking sick, but see y'all at the end of that clip. European petitions Stop Killing Games. Why providing continued support do not work for all games. Introduction. The video games industry is committed to consistently providing players with high-quality interactive gaming experiences and recognizes the passion and community that grows around its games. The decision to discontinue a video game's online services is multifaceted and is never taken lightly, and must always be a matter of choice. When it does happen, the industry ensures that players are given fair notice of the prospective changes in compliance with local consumer protection laws. This document explains the reasons why a video game company may decide to discontinue the functionalities supporting the online video game, and why this may lead to the video game may no longer be playable. Online video games are interactive entertainment. Unlike a book or a film, an online video game is not a static work. Online video games are interactive entertainment that combine numerous elements of artistic and intellectual creation with software programming and server infrastructure. Online video games evolve over time after their initial release, providing consumers with regular new content, experiences, patches, and updates. This is highly valued by players and is required to compete in the market. It involves significant ongoing development expenditures over years, sometimes decades. Video games companies put significant investment into creating and developing the best interactive entertainment and experience for their passionate player bases. The right to decide how, when, and for how long to make an online video game services available to players is vital in justifying this cost and fostering continued technical innovation. As rights holders and economic entities, video games companies must remain free to decide when an online game is no longer commercially viable and to end continued server support for that game. Imposing a legal obligation to continue server support indefinitely or to develop online video games in a specific technical manner that will allow permanent use will raise the costs and risks of developing such games. It will have a chilling effect on game design and act as a disincentive to making such games available in Europe. It is far from a trivial modification or a simple addition to the game development phase. It would ignore material reputational, safety, and security concerns. While there are video game companies that have elected to enable their online services to live beyond that is being proposed they're commercially viable, this is and must always be a matter of choice, as it will depend on what is reasonable and appropriate for the specific game, games company, and audience. All video games, whether digital or physical copies, are licensed, as in the case with virtually all digital works when consumers purchase online games, regardless of the country of sale. What they acquire is a personal license to access and play the copy of the game they have purchased in accordance with the game's terms of service. The consumer does not acquire ownership of that video game. These clear intellectual property rights underpin the entire market and enable the strong investment that the industry has seen for decades. There is no legal uncertainty about the status quo of video games. Why an obligation on video game companies to provide only a limited time of end-of-life plan is disappropriate. It is not clear what the initiators of the Stop Killing Games petition seek to achieve as a legal change. It appears to be a combination of a requirement to provide online services for as long as the consumer wants them, regardless of price paid, and/or a requirement to provide a very specific form of end-of-life plan where the game is altered to enable private servers to operate. We do not believe these are proportionate demands. Online video games are complex operations. They offer interactive features that are supported by multiple servers, enabling functionality of ever-increasing complexity. This is integral to the modern gameplay experience that players expect. As consumer expectations for more engaging and evolving content increases, these online features are increasingly becoming intertwined in the overall gameplay experience as opposed to being limited to a dedicated online mode within the game. In many video games, this interconnected dependency makes it difficult to cleanly segregate online features from offline functionality. Here are the ways in which players and companies would be affected. Player safety. Reduced or no player protection. Requiring games to run on private servers would result in the inability for games companies to continue to protect players from illegal or harmful content or conduct, as their moderation and player safety terms would no longer be involved. In particular, cheating could become rampant without proper enforcement. Reporting systems designed to allow players to flag problematic content and behavior to games companies would no longer operate as intended or would have to be disabled entirely. The absence of effective moderation systems would create a less safe environment for consumers and may foster the proliferation of undesirable content, while simultaneously frustrating the availability for EU digital services coordinators to act against such content. This not only presents a safety risk for consumers, but could also lead to brand reputation issues for the video games company. Increased security risks. Releasing game code or server binaries to facilitate the creation of private servers operated by players could expose game companies and consumers to bad actors, malware, data breaches, and DDoS attacks. Impact on companies. Significant engineering and architectural changes. Allowing players to run private servers would present significant engineering and architectural challenges for many games due to the way in which such online features are integrated with other proprietary systems and services required for the game. Creating a private server compatible version would be a prohibitive cost, in some cases years or decades after the game's initial release when only a small audience remains. Negative impact on investment in games, jobs, growth, and consumer choice. Ensuring an online game can work without official server support requires a significant investment of engineering resources, making it a very costly exercise for video game companies. Many of the costs that game companies would incur in implementing an end-of-life plan would have to be incurred towards the end of the commercial life of the game, when it is no longer commercially viable to continue support. Requirements to implement such plans could lead to less risk-taking, fewer investment projects in developing new games, and potentially fewer jobs. Ultimately, could lead to increased costs for consumers and less choice. Reputational harm. Allowing players to run private servers with online interaction possibilities could result in players using those games in ways that don't align with the game company's brand values, leading to a negative association with the brand, thereby harming its reputation. Impact on intellectual property rights. Erosion of intellectual property rights. Mandating game companies to keep their online games operable post-official support would undermine their rights and autonomy in deciding how their intellectual property is utilized. There is a vital interest in maintaining effective copyright protection, including protection against circumvention of technologies that control access to copyrighted video game software, where such circumvention is undertaken in circumstances that would lead to the unauthorized public exploitation of games. Competition from community-supported versions. Such a requirement could lead to community-supported versions of games competing with official versions, potentially jeopardizing the financial investments of the video games companies. This would lead to confusion between trademarks, and the original trademark holder may be held responsible for actions undertaken by a community-supported version. Forfeiture of licensing and reproduction rights. Allowing consumers to create or run modified copies of online games would necessitate games companies to either license additional rights or refrain from enforcing them, effectively leading to a forfeiture of control over these rights. Constraints from third-party IP. Games companies often utilize third-party software and services, which may have licensing terms restricting their use to the commercial life of the game or prohibiting sub-licensing to players, hereby hindering the modification of patching of games for private servers. In particular, this could jeopardize and infringe the copyright of the musical works and lead to legal action from these right holders on the basis of unauthorized exploitation of their work. Constraints from third-party services. Games depend on third-party services such as platforms on which the game is offered to the consumer. Releasing the code for those services, which would be necessary should a legal requirement allow player communities to run a game, may not be possible, as this would potentially be an IP infringement. Furthermore, game companies' servers are increasingly run on the cloud. If cloud servers are discontinued, which sometimes happens, this necessitates either shutting down older titles or creating costly workarounds. The latter may not always be possible. All of the above would also affect compliance with PEGI ratings. Where a game has a PEGI age rating and offers multiplayer functionality, the game's company is contractually bound by the PEGI Code of Conduct to respect various obligations related to online safety and privacy. The inability to do so would expose the game's company to legal uncertainty with respect to its contractual obligations under the PEGI Code of Conduct. The importance of consumer protection laws. Notwithstanding the applicable licensing structure, all video games offered to players in the EU are subject to European consumer protection laws, which include robust transparency and fairness obligations on games companies and ensure that games companies act reasonably when terminating online support for a game. European consumer protection laws provide consumers with warranties and redress rights with respect to both the game and the physical medium on which the game is made available, but these laws do not transfer ownership of the game to consumers. Games are licensed to the consumer in accordance with their terms of service. These set out with the terms upon which consumers may access and play such games and the situations in which such licensed rights may be terminated. Consumers are informed that their access to online games and associated services may terminate and are informed with sufficient notice in cases where that does happen. Transparency. Players must be given reasonable prior notice before any termination of access to the game. Reimbursement. The Digital Content Directive provides consumers with price reduction and reimbursement rights in certain circumstances, but also with repair and replacement rights if a game service fails to achieve conformity with certain required warranties. Service duration. EU legislation requires that the service aspects of online video games be provided for a reasonable amount of time. Taking into account all relevant factors, it would be disproportionate for a specific duration to be imposed, as this would need to be valid of all types of services, not just games. Fair terms. The Unfair Terms Directive prohibits games companies from imposing terms on consumers that significantly imbalance the parties' rights and obligations to the detriment of consumers. Video game companies are committed to the preservation of games and their culture. It is important to separate the legal proposals being made by the petitioners for specific end-of-life requirements for commercial video games from the question of the preservation of games as creative and cultural works. Video Games Europe and their member companies are committed to and actively support serious professional efforts to preserve video games and recognize the industry's creative contributions under circumstances that do not jeopardize a game company's rights under copyright law. For example, members regularly donate game copies and hardware to preserve organizations and support museum exhibitions featuring games. Other video game companies have undertaken the gigantic task of creating video games libraries to support the preservation of games. However, the industry's innovation and economic activities depend on strong copyright protection for the software and other creative works that are its lifeblood, and preservation efforts should not be confused with uses that could conflict with the normal exploitation of the work by the right holder or unreasonably prejudice the legitimate interests of the author. So one of the first things I want to comment on after reading it over is forfeiture of licensing and reproduction rights. This section 8 under impact on companies and player safety, which I don't understand why impact on intellectual property rights and impact on companies is underneath this player safety section, because the numbers keep going down like that. Unless this person just doesn't know how to utilize a PDF writer for documentation, but I mean, that's kind of an obvious with the grammar that was utilized in this. But let's take a look at section 8 here. Forfeiture of licensing and reproduction rights. This section I have a couple problems with, and I have a couple examples as to how this just blatantly doesn't work as an argument. So let me scroll down on here. It'll make it a little bit more difficult for me to read, but easier for you guys. So this section states allowing consumers to create or run modified copies of online games would necessitate games companies either license additional rights or refrain from enforcing them, effectively leading to a forfeiture of control over these rights. And I disagree with this. Heck, this doesn't even really apply as long as they are selectively enforcing. If they are selectively enforcing, then they still have the right to enforce it. And that's been proven time and time again by the usage of anti-cheat in several games. For example, with Dragon Ball FighterZ. Dragon Ball FighterZ has a skin system for, like, a modded skins. Has tons of modded skins, has some modded characters. And they have an anti-cheat, and they enact their right to ban cheaters and prevent cheaters from playing on their ranked matches, and prevents them from utilizing a modded version of the game to play on their online services. Now, of course, there are some like niche workarounds to permit people that are modding to play with other people that are modding, but it's like they're still effectively preventing these people from utilizing their service in the online capacity. And it didn't, to my understanding, it didn't lead to forfeiture of any rights of the company. They chose to allow modders to utilize skins, and outside of that, they still have the right to ban modders. I mean, that still happens. And this same line is the whole crux of the argumentation, saying that the Take-Two Interactive terms of service is a okay terms of service to have on Borderlands, which I fundamentally disagree that it is an okay terms of service to have, especially after being under Embracer Group, with Gearbox being under Embracer Group for so long. But that's a conversation for another video. When it comes to this, it's like there's clear evidence that that's not exactly the case, especially with how it is showcased in the games industry as of right now. One of your partners in your organization, Bandai Namco, them along with Arxis are the ones who hosts Dragon Ball FighterZ, and that it still functions that way. So I don't think this applies the way that this reads. Next part I want to talk about is reputational harm. It's the section 5 under the impact on companies and under the more broad player safety section, because I would assume this is covering all of these, again, because they're numbered. Super weird the way this is formatted. But this section talks about allowing players to run private servers with online interaction. Possibilities could result in players using those games in ways that don't align with the company's brand values, leading to a negative association with the brands, thereby harming its reputation. I disagree with this. Why the heck would I assume that this external company that is hosting the server, or the players within the game, are associated with the brand's core values? I mean, heck, with Call of Duty, Xbox Call of Duty players is so notorious that all of the stereotypes. See, I don't even need to talk about it. It's just so well known that the stereotypes of the player base. And nobody really accuses Call of Duty of supporting those beliefs, not to my knowledge. And I would say that it's not intelligent to assume that Call of Duty or Activision are condoning that kind of behavior by it being on the platform. When it comes to the competition from community-supported versions line, I want to talk about this a little bit because I have a little bit of personal experience after going through some of the gacha game industry when I was younger. The system that this applies under. Well, actually, let's just read it off first before I start talking. Such a requirement could lead to community-supported versions of games competing with official versions, potentially jeopardizing the financial investments of the video games companies. This would lead to confusion between trademarks, and the original trademark holder may be held responsible for actions undertaken by a community-supported version. So, I disagree with the second half. Talking about the trademarks and original trademark holder, I definitely believe that people, when they look at a private server or a community-supported version of the game, they would be like, well, this game was made by these people. They're not made by the people who made the private server. They're made by the people who made the game. I don't see that as that is being a big deal. Now, the trademark section in when it comes to content within the game, if their only experience with the game is with a community-supported version, I could see an argument for it, but that's going to be so few and far between that I don't think it's a relevant conversation to have. And even then, there are probably going to be private server variants that are 100% one-to-ones to the game and are just there to host online services, which, if it was made to be that way, then that's cool too. I don't mind that. It's keeping the game one-to-one instead of having a modified version of the game. But when it comes to competition, there are some things that I can agree with. For example, in the gacha game community, there are very much private servers for some of these games. And I used to play Dragon Ball Z Dokkan Battle. That was a game that I used to play a lot. And after playing it for a while, and I was really into it, I'd get off of it, I'd get back on it, and I just enjoyed the game, but I was a free-to-play player, so I didn't really invest in it, and whenever I ran out of stones and ran out of content to play, I was kind of just like, well, I'm just going to wait for the next big update to come back and play, because then there will be more stones for me to grind, and there will be more content for me to play. And the switch that happened when it came to that was, well, now I have access to Dokkan Entropy, or Phoenix, or these private servers that had all of the characters already summoned. And for some of them, I could build the characters the way that I wanted to, and play the content the way that I wanted to, without having a requirement to go and grind out the materials that were on a timer for me to potentially get the characters I wanted to play with. And so I could play at the same level as somebody putting money into the game without ever putting money into the game. And of course it wasn't competing with anybody, but I never played the game to be competitive. I played the game to play casually. And when these other servers came out, I was like, well, This is literally just what I want out of the game. And then with Entropy, there was modded content, so there was more content to play with, and modded characters, more characters to use, and more variety. And so I was just like, well, why would I play the original game if I have access to this other thing? And the main reason why I did continue to play the original game for a little bit while I utilized that private server, and that was strictly because I wanted to support the game at the time. It had nothing to do with me me enjoying the service that the company was giving over the private server. It was just I wanted to support the company, and I recognized that by playing on the private server, I wouldn't be supporting them. I didn't want to pay money into it because I think the gacha system of gacha games isn't something that's for me at the time, and so I didn't put money into it. Now, I disagree with the whole business model, and I don't play their games. I've quit all of the gacha games that I used to play at this point. When it comes to the traditional definition of a, well, not traditional, the mobile game definition of a gacha game, the summon spinner games. So, coming back to the player safety section, I don't understand how they have this formatted, because they use the words player safety, and then the second thing that they mention is releasing game code or server binaries to facilitate the creation of private servers operated by players could expose game companies and consumers to bad actors, malware, data breaches, and DDoS attacks. I feel like the main thing here that we're commenting on is right here, is this was the first part that was mentioned. And it's not exactly a good argument, especially when they could have talked about that in the reduced or no player protection section, and they partially did with the from illegal or harmful content or conduct, as that would apply right here. Now, there's one more piece that I want to talk about, and they talk about data breaches when it comes to player safety, and, well, we can just take a look at PlayStation to judge how well they do with data breaches. But even then, I wouldn't even say that data breaches are one of the primary concerns when it comes to player safety in video games. Looking for development companies and, well, developers and publishers, mostly on the publisher side from what I've seen, that actually care about retention practices and deleting data that they shouldn't use, or like they don't need after a time frame, is few and far between. And even then, looking for the information these companies collect or sell, like heck, Take-Two Interactive, under their clause in the CCPA, or like that's mandatory by the CCPA, they state that they have sold user data within the last 12 months. They just say that they've sold it. And then there's the whole Ubisoft being sued for data practices that's going on right now. I think they're being sued over data practices. And it's just like, what the heck? You want to claim that data breaches is a security risk in this regard, but then you have multiple companies under your membership that actively collect and retain data that they probably shouldn't, and then sell this information to data brokers, probably, allegedly, and to outside organizations from their games. The more that the data gets spread around, the less secure it is, and by copying and pasting and spreading it everywhere to all these other companies or these third-party software companies, it makes it harder and harder for it to be trustworthy, for people to rely on them to store that information. I mean, heck, we have Take-Two down here. We have Ubisoft right next to them. Let's go to Take-Two. And let's go right here. Oh, I already had it pulled up. In the last 12 months, Take-Two has sold and or shared unique identifiers, IP addresses, as well as internet electronic activity and profile inferences with third-party advertising providers to enable us to provide personalized advertising to you and others like you. We do not sell or share personal information about persons that we know are under the age of 16 without their, or depending on their age, their parents' consent. This line is a requirement via the CCPA. And in a lot of other policies, I tend to see it being labeled as CCPA, and in this one it wasn't, and I'm curious as to why. Maybe to prevent people from control F-ing down here? I don't know. Just conjecture. But it is very interesting that this is right here, and you want to claim that data breaches is an issue. on the private server front. Heck, when it comes to private servers, they tend to be hosted in more consolidated or smaller communities, and so there'd be less warrant to go after these. If there's a whole bunch of private servers for a game, and if they're all separated, then there's a whole bunch of data that is separated. And so when somebody gets into one, unless that same exploit is via the game, they're probably not going to get into all of these networks and collect this information. They're just going to get into that one, and then they're going to leave, and then they're going to go and try another one. They're probably not going to get all of them. And so, if anything, it makes it more reliable to be able to trust these smaller banks of data than it is to trust the big corporate, which we have shown, again, with PlayStation, the amount of times that they get hacked and data stolen or whatnot. If that was one of the big problems here. And I have a couple other ones on here that I want to talk about. Let's see here. I think EA actually had a better CCPA section in their thing. Let's see. Here we go. Notice that collection. And it tells you all the stuff that they collect. It tells you the disclosed additional information. And then they tell you the following categories of personal information may be sold or shared as those terms are defined on the CCPA. And then they have the clause, we do not sell or share as those terms are defined on the CCPA personal information of consumers under 16 years of age. We also only use or disclose sensitive personal information is defined on the CCPA for the purposes specified in section 702M. So they don't directly state that they sell your data, although they don't say that they don't. So I really think that, oh, whoops, I just realized that this is off center. Here we go. We do not sell or share as those terms are defined in the CCPA. That area there. And when it comes to this, let's see, do they have another section that says anything about where they sell it? No, they just bring up the case law. They just bring up the law. Okay. You know, at least they linked to the law and talked about it. I have to give them props for that. But they didn't bring up that whether or not they sold under those terms for the average player. They based it off of the age requirements in the law. Okay, I mean you're being compliant, but what the heck? You're not saying anything. I would like to know whether or not you're selling information. That would be something that I would very much love to know. Although, based off of a whole bunch of things that I have read, they probably are. Allegedly. Allegedly they are. And, again, this company is associated with them on here. EA. EA's on that list. Right here. We have EA. And then Riot Games. So I actually have a little rabbit hole I want to go down when it comes to Riot Games. Because just simply going to Riot Games and checking out their privacy policy and stuff, we can do that. But they're not even the bigger player at play when it comes to Riot Games. Actually, hold on. So Tencent owns Riot Games. And there is another company on this list that is associated with Tencent. And let's see if I can find it off just listed reading here. I think it was Video Games Belgium. Okay, so I found it. Is the right here, VGFB, and this is the page, VGFB, and one of the members is Tencent. And for those that don't know what Tencent is a Chinese company. But Tencent is a Chinese company, and they have one of the largest market shares in the gaming industry right now, and they are very much based off of conjecture and in my experience here with reading over this stuff. They seem to be very in bed with how the governmental system works over there, but based off of that, they have quite a bit of ties with the Chinese government, and it is easy to assume that any institution that is hosted or based in China probably has some sort of association with their governmental system, especially if they're a larger company like that. So one of the largest countries on the planet having a large data center like that. It seems kind of obvious what's going on there. But well, that and they're paired with whoops, I think it was this one. Here we go. They're with VGFB. Riot Games is underneath them. Riot Games has some of the most invasive games in the industry. Yeah, and they care about data brokers, and well, not data brokers. They care about freaking, where is it? Data breaches. Yeah. Okay, buddy. There's so many problems here. There's so many layers to this, and it's a pain to read this. I hate everything. This is their argumentation for saying that they should be permitted to kill games. And honestly, I was kind of hoping when they would make a comment that it would be relevant and something to actually have full discussions over. And in some of these cases there are, but for the most part, they've already been talked on, and the points that they brought up were very much old, going over the pirate software debate. Like, for example, the engineering and architecture challenges covering the private server system, whatnot. This was, whoops, I scrolled down too far. Actually, I'm gonna move this up a bit. There we go. This way it's centered on my screen. But they covered this argument the same, very similar way that Pirate Software did, which I do appreciate that he brought up his opinion, and that his opinion is very much similar to what this is, because it gave a lot of people practice to argue against this point. But it's also just like, why are these lobbying companies utilizing the same lines of logic? It's almost like it's an industry thing. So, y'all know how I just went through and listed my complaints or disagreements with their response? Well, they have a registry on the Transparency Register on the EU website. They are a official lobbying company that is under, let me go all the way down to the bottom here, because it's down here, under the Code of Conduct. By its registration, the organization has signed the Transparency Register Code of Conduct. So they have to be transparent with their intentions of their actions within the legal processes here, and well, with their intents and actions in regards to EU. So with that, I find it very interesting with a lot of things and how they worded things, because a lot of these seem to be hiding different things in them, and I don't like that, especially when this is supposed to be transparent. If that falls under being transparent, then oof, in my opinion, that doesn't here. Let me move this over. There. By its registration, the organization has signed the Transparency Register Code of Conduct. Yeah. And with some of their leaders being from different gaming corps. Oh, here's a list. Persons accredited for access to Parliament premises. I guess this wouldn't exactly fall into what I'm talking about, but they do have names here of all the people that are actually going to be talking about it with in the legal sense. The list of, but we have the number of people. There's so much just information on here. I'll leave this in the description for you guys to go check out on your own if y'all want to do your own digging. I will look through this at some point with a much deeper scope on it, but I do find it very interesting that this is here, and I really don't think that that this paper was very transparent. There were a lot of things in here that seem like they either didn't understand what was going on, don't care about what's going on, or have very hidden scopes, such as, again, with the security risks section talking about game companies and consumers, with the emphasis in the sentence being phrased as game companies. It just doesn't feel right. It really doesn't. And I guess that kind of happens a lot when you're reading over legal stuff like this, but I don't know. It just seems very sketch to me. But that's all I got for this video, and for those that want to have a conversation about this, feel free to leave comments or message me on Discord or something. I love having these conversations. And see y'all in the next video. Stereoletta77 signing off.